On this holiday edition of OTR, we welcome freshman Republican House member Representative Joe Aragona. And we'll be talking about the Governor Whitmer presidential speculation story and more on the history-making debate last week. Around the OTR table, Simon Schuster, Jordan Hermany, and Rick Pluta. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C on this holiday weekend. We are recording on a Tuesday, which is an all-time first. We've never been on a Tuesday, which means a lot of stuff is going to happen after today, which we aren't going to be talking about. So we apologize for that. But let's take a look at the story that refuses to go away. What about Gretchen Whitmer and all this presidential stuff? Governor Gretchen Whitmer's name has been in play for months as a possible presidential candidate. Nothing new there. But given the current president's wobbly debate performance last week, the fever over her has gone even higher. So, what is the Michigan governor saying about all this speculation? Answer: absolutely nothing. Instead, the governor's office did react to the debate, where she ignored the president's performance and focused on denouncing former President Donald Trump. And as expected, there was nothing about the speculation surrounding her. Adding to this national drumbeat is the upcoming release of her first book. And if you're looking for some insight on this issue of the presidential thing in there, forget it. She ignores it completely, which pretty much leaves us to examine what she has said over the past concerning this speculation, beginning with the speculation that she wanted to be vice president with Joe Biden. You said last September, I do not want to be vice president. That still holds.
Correct.
That has not changed.
Not at all.
And it won't.
Correct.
End of story? Well, not quite. 2 years later, she finally confessed if he had called. If he called and offered it, would you have taken it?
Tim, if Joe Biden would have called and said, I need you to be my partner and be my running mate, I would have said yes.
So if that situation changed in her thinking about VP, would her thinking change about president? In 2022, she made this firm statement about the presidency in 2024.
I'm not going to run for president in 2024. Period.
You mean it?
Yes.
Some Democrats continue to chat about finding another candidate other than Joe Biden. So could she change her mind about not running in 2024? You bet she could change her mind. In politics, anything, of course, is possible. But there are absolutely no indications, repeat, no indications, that she even wants that chance. So why won't this story go away?
I mean, you look at the debate performance that we saw from Biden the other week. He was mumbled. He stumbled. His stutter clearly got the best of him. It did not display the air of somebody who seemed like they would be fit for another 4 years of a presidency. So it is natural, honestly, for the party and voters to gravitate towards a younger, seemingly more with it candidate who is able to articulate her views without sort of stumbling into a trailed off sentence. Why won't it die? You know, I think it's just because people have hope that there's maybe something that the DNC is going to do to remove Biden. Then that's from a lot of, voters, online social media presence of people saying that I was like people watching the debate with their head in their hands saying that we need somebody else. It's natural that people are looking elsewhere.
The context of the Whitmer for president discussion has typically been in the 2028 cycle. And there are, a lot of people who are lined up for that. It's just, right now she's in the top 3 or 4 people who are discussed in that lane. Now, because of Biden's dismal performance in the debate, that's all been bumped up, because anytime you're talking about a replacement candidate. Well, I'm saying this like it's a normal thing, and it happens all the time. So, I mean, in this unusual situation, everybody who's talked about as a post-Biden possibility is now been, moved up into the 2024 cycle.
I think when you look at all of the anxieties that Democrats have about a Trump presidency. And when you look at current polling, there's sort of this background hubbub that has always been there throughout the campaign. And when you look at Republicans who have spent years pushing the story about Biden's cognitive decline, and then you see him have, as Jordan said, these stumbles and mumbles during the debate, it sort of adds enormous amount of fuel to that fire. And when you look at independent, persuadable voters who are already dejected about this election, they're already looking for excuses. You know, these might be moderate conservatives who are looking for an excuse to vote for Biden. It takes away from, they have one almost less reason than they did before. And so I think that Governor Gretchen Whitmer, while she's at the top of these wish lists, is not somebody who has any interest in sort of taking a subprime opportunity to jump in the race. She's a national co-chair of the campaign, and Democrats have a sort of solidarity, I think, amongst themselves where, you know, this is the horse they rode in on, and they're not necessarily.
And also, if there was interest in, you know, jumping in right now, serious interest, it would, and I haven't seen any indications that there is.
That's because there isn't any.
Yeah, and why would you do that if there's this big change, you know, with a collapse of the top of the ticket and the vice presidential nominee, well, person who will be the vice presidential nominee, who is the current vice president, Kamala Harris, then there is absolutely no advantage to putting yourself in there when in that circumstance you can just say, well, you know, things have changed that a lot of people want me to do that. And so, you know, here you are.
Well, not to mention the optics of it all, too. I mean, you have a president, an older white man who has a black younger woman as his VP. And the conversation has been, well, what if we just jump over her? The optics coming out of the Democratic Party, that would just be abysmal.
With a party which is already in trouble with that black base of the party.
Exactly. So, you know, if any conversation is to be had about somebody replacing Biden, it either is likely needs to be, if they want to avoid that kind of public gaffe, it either needs to be Harris or, frankly, another black woman, because the optics, again, of the intersectionality there, overlooking a woman, overlooking a black woman, it's bad for them.
One of the things that's interesting to me is that when you look at the 2020 election, there was an argument to be made for voting for Trump among moderates, traditional Republicans, that says, you know, you may not like the way he acts, his statements in public, but what you're voting for is judicial confirmations in the Senate. You know, Mitch McConnell's coming forward and say we've this many hundred federal judges, and you're voting for an administrative apparatus that's going to move the country in a conservative direction. And now, in 2024, on the flip side, this is the argument that a lot of people, I think, are going to be increasingly making for Joe Biden, that it's not just about one man, that it's about, again, all of these things that surround the presidency and all the powers that brings with it. And I think when you look at the presidential immunity ruling that came down from the Supreme Court yesterday, that is just another arrow in that quiver.
It seems like they took their sweet time getting around to it. But this morning, I finally heard a Democratic governor talking about exactly what Simon is talking about, which is you're not just getting a president, but you're getting the team of advisors that move an agenda forward. And, you know, that maybe that'll finally be the winning message to persuade Michiganders.
The governor got into a dust-up with the Politico people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
With a statement we can't hear.
We saw the true Gretch, to quote a line. What was the problem with the political story?
Well, it basically showed that she had no faith in her own candidate, for which she is a national co-chair.
Win in Michigan. That was the allegation.
Reportedly.
Wow. She's disputing that.
No,
I didn't say she said it. That's what they reported.
Right. And so, you know, we have to emphasize that it's a column. It's not an article. From Politico, wherein Governor Gretchen Whitmer seemed to tell somebody within the Biden campaign, you know, that Biden can't win Michigan after that debate. To be clear, within the context of that column, it was relayed by somebody who categorized themselves as a possible 2028 Democratic opponent against Whitmer for the presidency.
Who had a hidden agenda to take her out.
But all I'm saying is you do have to treat that with a little bit of skepticism. Your source is clearly inherently biased, so, you know, there's plausible deniability there. And I do find it a little difficult to admit that for somebody who has been so emphatically in Biden's camp this entire time, hasn't wavered, hasn't made any kind of statement that she's going to go for the presidency, that she would just after one showing throw her hands up and say, well, that's it, we're done.
Yeah, everyone's countered everything we've seen publicly.
Exactly.
And there's absolutely no reason for her to do that. And, you know, and she could say, look, you've made it harder, Mr. President. And, you know, that's true. But to say that, well, you know, never mind, Michigan is no longer in play, don't need me.
Right.
You know.
I just don't think that's, and so, you know, her
It makes
lashing
zero
out
sense.
on social media, she mentioned that, you know, anybody who thinks that the president couldn't win Michigan
Careful.
right.
Is
Not
full
sound.
of, is
yes,
full of
exactly.
feces.
So, you know, she's clearly made her point, you know, to the Detroit News, or she also made a statement saying that she's 100% behind the president. So she's very clearly trying to put this behind her. And you know, whether that happens, TBD. But yeah, I definitely think that she had a reason for.
We have also been through enough presidential cycles to know that in Michigan, things just, I mean, careen back and forth in terms of.
There is an eternity between now and November.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There is an eternity. Okay, this is a moment in time that looks bad, but who knows what's around the corner?
The best thing about this debate for Joe Biden is the date on which it occurred. Bar none.
Precisely. Now look at her statement in that piece. I will not run for president in 2024. Just speculative. Could she walk that back if she had to? Yes, in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Sure.
In a heartbeat. The dynamics of when she said that back in 2022, I can't remember what year it was, okay? They all come together. And where we are now are completely different. So that is not a problem.
Yeah, I think when you look at the comparison, I think all personal statements can be cast aside when you're answering the call of service. But that means that there has to be the call. And right now there is none. So this is all.
It's interesting. It's interesting in the other answer that we didn't put in there in that same interview. She said if there was a call to service 10, 15 years down the road, anything is, quote, possible. So story will not go away, right? The debate fallout in Michigan. What are Michigan people saying about this? Are they putting the wagons in a circle here?
I think when you look at Democrats, there's reactions ranging from a grim determination to soldier on to despondency, of course. But if they're despondent behind closed doors in private. But at the same time, I think, you know, they're wanting to, again, pivot towards policy, pivot and say that we can change the direction, the trajectory of this election by not so much focusing on Biden himself, but all of this other stuff. But at the same time, I mean, essentially, this is a campaign without a candidate in large part, because he's not somebody who they're going to want to be putting out in front of voters on a regular basis.
In an unscripted, you know, sort of, you know,
All right, so
anything can happen fashion.
If you're down ticket in Michigan and you look at the top of the ticket, based on where we are right now, are you worried?
I mean, you're always going to have that level of worry. I hate to make it sound like a cop-out, but I mean, you look at Governor Gretchen Whitmer, her polling has somewhat remained independent of Biden. I have to imagine that there are people that are going to go in on Election Day and just vote for the president and walk out and vote for nothing else. So, I mean, there's always that fear, whether or not that's going to materialize. I mean...
Well, if you're in one of those 6 or 7 or 8 House swing districts and you have a D after your name, on the 4th of July, are you worried about not the fireworks up there, but the ones at the ballot box?
Absolutely. You know, that this is a turnout issue. And are people going to stay home? Are you hoping that people who maybe won't vote for Biden will still show up to vote lower in the ticket? There's
that's
big
going to be
concern.
the real thing. Is it's not going to be, are there going to be crossover votes? It's how many people are going to stay home after this. You know, you brought up a really interesting point earlier about the concept of needing to mobilize behind the concept of what a Biden presidency represents rather than Biden himself. You know, and you also talk about people being maybe behind closed doors, very afraid of what's to come.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how that's going to play out over the next couple of months, because you even have people who on social media said, I didn't watch the debate, but I heard. So Democrats are already, you know, losing a lot of ground here.
The beer test still exists. This is still, like, for a huge swath of the electorate, about individuals.
And if you're Gretchen Whitmer, you're going out and campaigning for House candidates, because that is definitely state House candidates.
Yes.
That is definitely up for
Within their
grabs.
wheelhouse.
And saying that Michigan is in play, all the policies about abortion and health care are in play, and you need to get out and vote for that too.
All right, let's see what our guest has to say about all this. Representative, come on in, Joey. Welcome to Off the Record. Nice to have you on the program on this holiday weekend. Let's cut right to the chase. You had a chance to spend $5 million on rebuilding Mount Clemens downtown, and you voted no. Explain that to the folks at home.
Sure. It's $5 million out of an $83 billion budget. There was plenty of waste, plenty of pork throughout this entire budget. A lot of things that I don't think we needed to be spending money on as a state government. So I had to vote no. Number one. Number two.
Let me get this story straight. You're from Macomb County. Last time I checked, Mount Clemens is still in Macomb County.
Mm-hmm.
You had a chance to help your hometown people, and you voted no.
My hometown is Clinton Township.
But you are in Macomb County.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
But Tim, $5 million is compared to $83 billion, and the majority of that was waste. I mean, I think it was $400 million in just pork projects alone. That's a lot of waste. I'd love to vote for that $5 million. I think the $5 million is going to go to a great project. It's going to go to a housing project that we desperately need throughout the state and in Macomb County. But $5 million to sacrifice for that $400 million with plenty of other waste, I couldn't do it.
Jordan.
We're talking about the governorship. I hate to, pivot back to the governor potentially running for president, but this struck me the other day. Say that does happen. Say that Governor Whitmer does end up going national. Who do you see as a Republican possibility to run either in the coming gubernatorial election or, if Governor Gretchen Whitmer does leave Michigan to become potentially the Democratic presidential candidate?
Sure. So first of all, if she leaves, I'm still very excited about us picking up the House. I think we still carry the House. If she leaves, and by the way, I think she is running for president in 4 years. I don't think she'll make a good president. However, I do applaud her for being ambitious. I can never say that that's a bad thing. Well done, Governor. But as far as names, I think we have quite a few names. I think Eric Nesbitt is one of the tops. I think there's a variety of business people throughout Michigan who want to take a strong look at it. My favorite is always Candace Miller. I keep asking her to do it. She keeps telling me no. We'll see if I can convince her in the next 4 years. We'll see.
No. Who is the top Republican voice in Michigan representing the views of the conservative movement and the Republican Party?
Who
people will pay attention to?
In terms of at the top of the ticket?
Well, who would be the elected official who has the gravitas and the magnetic quality, who can step up front and be the voice of the Republican Party the way that Gretchen Whitmer is the voice of the Democratic Party? I mean, it doesn't seem like you really have someone right now, considering all the problems the Republican Party has had in Michigan.
I think we have still a lot of strong voices throughout the legislature. I think we have strong voices, like I said, even in the business community. We lost the House for the first time in decades. Years anyway. The Democrats have a trifecta for the first time in decades. I think this has been a very bonding moment for all conservatives, for all Republicans. So I think we have a number of them that are going to start to emerge. I think some of the freshmen, too.
Who would you point to? As a voice for the Republican Party, your choice from anywhere.
For the Republican Party or for the House?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. I think we have a number of them in the House. A good friend of mine, Jay DeBoyer from St. Clair County, very much a strong conservative, just got elected as the head of the Conservatives Caucus within the House of Representatives. Very salient arguments for a variety of different things. Very dynamic speaker. I think you're going to see him emerging over the years. Mike Hoadley's one. He's I think has the ear of many of the strong conservatives on the right. As far as around the state, I think there's a number of them. I echo back to Candace Miller. Again, she might not pick up the hard right, but she can very much galvanize the Republicans when she comes out and speaks.
When you look at Macomb County, which is where your district is located, this is going to be important territory in the presidential election in November. Do you see this debate factoring into any of that messaging?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This debate was atrocious for President Biden. And Macomb County is one of those places that likes to see a strong leader. They want to see all right, we elected you, take charge. Let me see what you did. Show me what you've done. Biden could not do that. I think that the Democrats realize they're in trouble with him at the top of the ticket.
How do you translate that down ballot, though? When you look at sort of Democrats who are willing to take middle-of-the-road positions, things that can convince people who might even be in a union shop or, part of organized labor, but tilt conservative, how do you bring them on board if they might not necessarily agree with how the former president speaks about certain issues?
I think they're already on board. They're going to the grocery store and seeing inflation because the Democrats printed a bunch of money and spent billions of dollars, and now all of a sudden it's pretty hard to afford groceries, or a lot harder to afford groceries, a lot harder to afford gas. They want somebody who can bring jobs in. They want to bring down inflation. They want to see our GDP go up across the nation, and I think they're about to vote Republican in November.
In Michigan, though, we have seen inflation level off.
I think nationwide you're seeing it go up. It's still going up. It's been going up for years. You can't print billions of dollars, spend it, and then expect there to be no effect on inflation.
Well, the inflation rate is not 8% anymore. It's around 3 to 4.
Okay, but it's continued. How many months, how many years did we have it up around 8%? That didn't just go away. That didn't go away, and all of a sudden now we got 4% and everything's fine. Things are still inflated. Have wages gone up?
All right, let's assume that your party takes back the majority.
Sure.
You want to be majority floor leader?
Sure.
Why?
I think we need somebody who can bring some decorum back to the House floor. I think you haven't seen that for the last year and a half.
Can you expand on that? When you say no decorum on the House floor, I'm curious what you mean.
We had a majority floor leader who turned around and tried to pump up the crowd, if you will, in the gallery. That shouldn't happen. That's not proper debate on the House floor.
I guess I'm confused.
That's just playing to the
I've
crowd.
not seen that though. I guess so you're talking about Representative Ayash, correct?
Yeah.
What issue was that on? I guess I can't remember.
I believe it was right to work.
Right to work.
Don't hold me to that, but I believe it was right to work.
When right to work was adopted, there was a crowd in the in the gallery as well.
I'm sorry?
When right to work was adopted, I was there. There was a crowd in the gallery as well, raising up a ruckus.
I was there too, and we had a great floor leader at the time, Jim Stamas, and he didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. He went about the business of the House, and he got things done. That's it.
All right,
you don't play to the crowd.
Besides decorum,
Yeah.
okay, which the average voter at home probably doesn't give a hoot about. Would you concede that?
I would.
Okay, all right, so why you floor leader?
I've done my best to lead on plenty of issues. I've done my best to help lead the freshman caucus. I am hyper-focused. Let me put it this way. I am hyper-focused on getting back majority. If I thought for 1 second that any type of leadership race will get in the way of that, I wouldn't do it. The caucus has to come first. Majority has to come first for the good of Michigan. But I believe that my caucus sees me as somebody who leads on issues. I'm always willing to sit down and talk with them, even if we disagree. I think they want somebody who will lead and won't placate, but even if you disagree, will at least show them respect.
Are you willing to work with the other side? Do you have any Democratic friends you'll work with?
We're going to have to work with the other side. We're going to take back the House, but the Senate's still going to be a Democratic majority, and Governor Whitmer is still going to be governor for another 2 years.
Can I ask a question about...
In that regards, I mean, and you look at Congress, you have a Republican House and a Democratic Senate with a Democratic president. Approval ratings for Congress in this country are hovering around, I think, about 10%. How do you, what's achievable for you other than obstructionism and gridlock?
In terms of what issues?
Policy, the budget.
Yeah, I think we can work across the aisle. I do have a number of friends over there that I think are willing to reach back across the aisle. You see a lot of gridlock in Washington. You're right. There's, I hope, a lot more politicians in Washington than there are in Lansing. I think there's hopefully more public servants.
But is there something you'd like to get done right now that you could point to with a Republican majority in the House?
In terms of goals for the next 2 years?
Yeah.
Matt, I'd love to bring down the income tax. I don't think that's going to be realistic with a Democratic Senate, but we're sure going to give it a hard try.
You're the top Republican on the Housing Committee.
Correct.
Is there any place, and which is a huge problem in the state and across the country, is there any place that you could point to where there is room for Democratic-Republican consensus to provide more affordable housing?
Yeah, there's actually a bill package that I have worked on with my counterpart, Christian Grant. So I think there's a number of ideas that will be bipartisan on the housing issue. The Republicans see that we should build more housing, and we want to kind of reduce regulation. Often the Democratic side says, well, let's appropriate dollars to try and subsidize low-income housing. I think in the middle there is some area to work where we can say, all right, let's let's incentivize housing, and maybe it can be a high density or something of that nature. But let's try and incentivize builders to build housing that's not just mini mansions. if you will.
Representative, is your bounty legislation dead on arrival when you introduce it on July 31st?
I don't think so. $4,500 in taxpayer money for a very nice coffee maker that I couldn't afford. $11,000 for a first class trip to Europe. Again, taxpayer money. All out of a $20 million grant that was overseen by one of Governor Whitmer's political friends.
You should explain, though, to do what?
You want to pay
Your subsidy.
reporters. You want to pay reporters for finding this stuff out.
I don't want to pay reporters. I want to give them a bounty.
Money will be exchanged.
Yeah, a bounty. We're not going to pay them. New York tried to, in fact, I think they actually appropriated about $30 million just to pay reporters. I don't want to pay reporters. NPR pays reporters. I don't want to do that. This is a bounty system. Silicon Valley does it. They use bug bounties, right? I have a program. I want you to break it because I want to know how it can be broken. I'll pay you if you
You might
do it.
overestimate how much we're paid when you look at the scale of these bounties.
I do just
But
want
also
to return
interest in
to
bounties.
legislation just very, very quickly. The Senate recently just passed a historic piece of bipartisan legislation, FOIA reform.
Yeah.
It's going to come over to the House.
Yeah.
Where are you at on that? Or
It's dead on arrival.
it's dead on arrival.
Governor Whitmer said that she would do this without legislation
Representative.
6 years ago.
I'll make you a deal. You want to stay for overtime?
Sure.
All right, you guys in?
Yeah. Sure.
All right, let's go to closed credits. Come back for more overtime with our representative. Go to WKAR.org. See you there.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.